1. Moving in. Lena sat among the cardboard boxes in the apartment she'd inherited from her late grandmother. The room smelled of old age, dust, and something else, a subtle, faint odor, as if something otherworldly had managed to permeate the place over the decades. Looking around, she noticed a huge mirror in a massive wooden frame in the corner. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, but even through the dirt she could see its strange depth. Her grandmother had always forbidden her to touch it. "Don't look into it in the dark," the old woman had whispered when Lena was a child. It had seemed ridiculous to her then, but now she was an adult, and the fears of childhood seemed ridiculous. Lena decided to leave the mirror where it was. 2. The first warning signs. The first oddities began almost immediately. One night, passing by the mirror on her way to the kitchen, Lena caught something strange with her side vision. The reflection was moving a little slower than she was. For a split second it lagged, as if it were watching her. She put it down to fatigue, but the next day she noticed something else. When Lena stood in front of the mirror to fix her hair, the reflection smiled slightly. She wasn't smiling. 3. Whispers from the depths. During the night, Lena awoke to a sensation of cold. The blanket had been thrown to the floor and the air in the room felt icy. Through the drowsiness, she heard something, a whisper, barely audible. It came from the mirror. Lena held her breath and listened. "Lena." Her heart raced. She turned on the light, but there was no one in the room, just her and her reflection. But the reflection wasn't looking at her, but a little to the side, as if behind her back. 4. The disappearance of the reflection. On the third day, Lena noticed that the reflection was becoming more and more independent. When she moved, it lingered for a moment. When she yawned, it continued to stare straight ahead, even if she closed her eyes. And then something really scary happened. One night, awakened by a strange sensation, she turned to the mirror and saw a void. Her reflection was gone, but there were wet footprints on the floor leading from the mirror to her bed. 5. The thin line between worlds. Lena called her friend in a panic and told her about her fears, but she only laughed and suggested throwing the mirror away. But something in the back of her mind told Lena it would not allow it. That night she did not sleep. She sat in front of the mirror, holding a knife in her hand, hoping that it was all just a bad dream. At 3 in the morning, the reflection returned, slowly, smoothly, as if sliding out of the shadows. It stood inside the mirror and looked directly at her. And then it took a step forward. 6. Trapped. Lena cried out, but the sound immediately disappeared, as if muffled by the dense silence. Her reflection now stood outside the mirror. It was smiling, wide, unnaturally, in a way that no human could smile. Its eyes were black, bottomless, and its skin was cold and pale. Lena froze, unable to move. The creature slowly tilted its head to the side, as if studying her. Then it reached out its hand and grabbed her wrist. Lena screamed, but the world around her changed. The room disappeared. There was nothing around. She was inside the mirror. 7. The new landlady. A few days later, a new tenant moved into the apartment. He noticed an old, massive mirror covered in dust. When he came closer, he thought for a second that someone was standing behind him, but he turned around and no one was there. And in the mirror, deep in its black reflections, Lena was smiling. 1. Night shift. Evan had been working in a taxi cab for a little over a year. He didn't like night shifts, but he needed the money, and they paid more at night. The streets became very different during those hours, dark, empty, almost unreal. Drunken companies, silent singles, couples returning from clubs. Sometimes there were strange passengers, but Evan had long ago gotten used to not asking too many questions. This night was especially quiet. Almost no one on the roads. The dispatcher was silent. There were no orders. He was already thinking about going to Mikado's for coffee when the call came in. The address looked unusual, somewhere out of town, near an old cemetery. It wasn't a place Evan liked, but work was work. He took the order and turned the car in the right direction. 2. The woman in the gray cloak. When Evan drove up to the specified place, there was no one there, just the cemetery gates creaking in the wind and the narrow road going into the darkness. He sighed, glancing at his watch. 2:47 in the morning. He was about to cancel the order, but at the same second a figure appeared in the headlights. A woman, tall, thin, wearing a long gray hooded cloak. She stepped out of the darkness so smoothly that Evan got goosebumps. She got into the back seat, closing the door silently. "Where are we going?" he asked, glancing in the mirror. 13 Black Ridge Road, the woman answered in a low voice. Evan frowned. He knew the town well, but he didn't remember such an address. "Is that somewhere outside the city? Just drive in." There was no threat in the voice, but something in it made him shut up and step on the gas. 3. Road to Nowhere. As he drove the car, there was silence in the cabin, only the hoarse breathing of the woman. She didn't move, didn't ask when they were coming, just stared out the window. The farther he drove, the fewer streetlights there were. The dense forest grew darker outside the window, and the road became narrow and bumpy. Evan turned on the navigator, but it couldn't find Black Ridge Road. The screen showed that there was nothing ahead, just emptiness. "Are we sure this is where we're going?" He couldn't take it anymore. "Almost," came a voice from the back seat. He caught himself thinking he hadn't heard the passenger breathing. 4. No reflection. He felt uneasy. He cast a glance in the mirror. The woman was sitting as before, but something was wrong. At first he didn't realize what it was, but then the blood froze in his veins. She wasn't reflected in the mirror. Evan's heart beat faster. His hands on the steering wheel sweated. Maybe he was imagining it? He blinked, looked back. The woman was still there, but in the mirror, just an empty seat. 5. They're close. Something rustled in the back seat. "We're almost there," she whispered. Evan clenched the steering wheel to white knuckles. He wanted to stop the car and run out, but he couldn't. A light flickered somewhere ahead, an old house by the roadside, dilapidated, with broken windows. "Are we there?" he asked, hoping this was all just a stupid joke. The woman nodded. He hit the brake, and the car jerked. At that moment, the phone rang. Not his cell phone. A muffled, old ringing, as if from another era. It came from the back seat. The woman raised her hand and handed him a black handset. "Take it." Evan shook his head, but his fingers reached for the phone. He put the receiver to his ear. "They're already there. Run." The voice was distorted, like the speaker was underwater. And then, a cold breath touched the back of his neck. 6. Disappearance. Evan screamed and jerked forward, trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The back seat was empty. The woman had disappeared, but the rearview mirror now reflected something else. A tall figure with a pale face and black eyes. It was smiling. The car stalled. Darkness enveloped him. The next morning his cab was found on an abandoned road. The car was empty, the driver gone. The doors were locked from the inside. Only on the windshield remained an inscription, written in thin, icy fingers. "Thanks for the ride. Now you're next."